The Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K12 educators in Tennessee through our online video library. These videos are aligned with standards set by the Tennessee Department of Education. For more professional development videos, check out our website at cem.mtsu.edu. Welcome to the Center for Educational Media in the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University. We're so glad you're joining us today for the next session in the K12 Collaborative, which is a professional development initiative that we have here in the College of Education for educators in Tennessee and beyond. In the K12 Collaborative, we offer specialized training in different areas for educators in Tennessee. We started in 2017 with the ELL Collaborative, followed in 2020 by the School Counselors Collaborative, and then in 2022 we started the SPED Collaborative. We are happy to announce today the beginning of the fourth collaborative, the AI in K12 Collaborative. In each of these collaboratives, the content that we offer educators in Tennessee is requested by practitioners in Tennessee and presented by those great educators who have been nominated by their peers. So today, we are happy to welcome Ms. Lois Bennett, high school English teacher in Rutherford County Schools. Ms. Bennett teaches 11th and 12th graders AP English and dual enrollment English. She has discovered and developed some successful practices to use AI in teaching high school English, and she is going to share those with us today. Ms. Bennett, we're so glad you're here today. Thank you for being here, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Bennett.
Hello, I am Lois Bennett, and like Laura said, I am a teacher in Rutherford County. I have been a teacher in Rutherford County for total teaching experience, 23 years. And most of those 23 years I taught on level 10th through 12th graders. I've been teaching the above level, AP Literature and dual enrollment more recently. And 2 years ago, I launched the Academic Integrity Committee at my high school. So I have a lot of experience in teaching writing. I also have a good amount of experience dealing with AI in academic writing, both the ethical and unethical kind. So I want to offer you today some approaches to teaching writing in an authentic way, even when many of our students are beginning to use tools that are provided by AI programming, because authentic writing is still possible and is still doable. So just an overview of what I would like to present to you today. First of all, I want to tell you a little bit about my philosophy of teaching writing and my philosophy of teaching in general, because that is what led me to teach writing the way that I do in my own classroom. We need to talk about why students cheat, because that is another reason why I presented my classroom the way it is in order to combat these unethical decisions at the source. And then I want to present to you my process or my philosophy on encouraging students to accept and to submit their authentic writing. And that involves presenting the teacher as a coach, emphasizing process over product, providing feedback over grades. But then we also need to talk about summative grades. I have some suggestions for you for creating cheat-proof assignments. And then the ultimate goal of my classroom, and hopefully your classroom as well, is establishing mutual trust between students and teachers. So first of all, just my philosophy for teaching in general. I believe that students want to learn and want to succeed, and that is core. It's important that we realize that students are in our room for a reason, and as reluctant as they may be to admit it or to practice it, they do want to learn. They want their day to be productive. Students are very worried about failure. Not necessarily failure of skills, they are worried about failing grades. They are worried about their GPAs dropping. They are worried about disappointing their parents. They are worried about looking unintelligent. They're also worried about being wrong. They also don't want to present their own ideas because they are afraid to be wrong. They have high expectations that they will be right at every juncture. It's important, though, for us in our classroom to develop a growth mindset. That's kind of been a buzzword for 10 or 15 years now, and it's difficult, but it's possible. And that is another essential element to my writing program. And like I said before, establishing mutual trust is important not just for building skills in a classroom, but also for building relationships with the students. Overall, my philosophy is that I am going to assume the best about my students. I'm going to assume that they are there with good intentions, and I'm going to assume that they are presenting and submitting to me their best work. But I'm also going to be prepared for the worst, because every student has a bad day or a bad night that leads them to make some bad decisions. So I want to be prepared for that at every level as well. So going back to basics, why do we teach writing? Why do we teach writing to begin with? If there's a computer program that can produce this material for us, why do students need to know how to do it in the first place? First of all, writing is not the result of learning. Writing is the learning. Students write in order to process their thinking. They write in order to elaborate on their ideas. And often I see this in AP essays, and I see this in material that my students produce. Students will write their way into a better idea than the one they started with. The writing is the learning. Writing teaches critical skills that students are going to need outside of the classroom as well. It teaches them how to think critically. It teaches them how to interpret data and how to interpret evidence. It teaches them how to analyze their own thinking, how to analyze something that they've read, how to analyze the ideas they've heard from other students. And of course, writing is critical for communication, even in today's world. The amount of writing that students are doing on the internet and seeing on the internet has made writing a really prevalent part of even the most ordinary citizens living. Writing involves inquiry, it involves argumentation and synthesis, it involves creativity. All of these skills are essential for decision making in everyday lives. So these skills are not just for the discipline of writing as a goal. These are skills that are required across all disciplines and across all career paths. So what's the problem? Why is teaching writing suddenly on the chopping block? Well, yeah, I have a couple of quotes here from two of the sources that I used in putting together this material. Stephen Mentz, who wrote Teaching Writing in the Age of AI, says, as artificial intelligence becomes increasingly capable of generating polished, grammatically correct text that meets academic standards, educators have to decide, how can we teach students to write authentically and effectively? And that really is it in a nutshell. That is the problem that we've been wrestling with since generative AI came on the scene. Jennifer Gunn, who wrote Real Writing in the AI World, points out that we do have a responsibility to our students to openly discuss the benefits and drawbacks of AI while keeping our instructional emphasis on the power of human thought. We have to find a way to teach students to use AI as a tool the same way that they would use a dictionary or a thesaurus, while still producing their own authentic ideas in their own authentic words. And finding that merger is going to be the challenge of the writing curriculum for the next several years. All right, so now that we've established why we teach writing, let's talk about why students cheat. Why do they make unethical decisions? And this is not just an AI problem. This is a problem that has existed for a long time. The number one reason in my classroom, since I teach advanced placement, I teach dual enrollment, the number one reason that the students in my classroom might choose that is because they're afraid to fail. These kids walk into my classroom with a 4.0 and they have every intention of keeping it that way. So if it comes down to choosing a good grade over a good idea, they're going to choose the good idea or the good grade. They are going to choose to submit work that is not their own because they trust it more than they trust their own words. They are also often afraid to look wrong or look unintelligent. The stress, the peer pressure of being in those high pressure classes makes them not want to even attempt an idea unless they have checked and made sure that it's right. And I hear that from them all the time. They're like, well, I didn't get the idea from the internet. I just had to double check that it was right before I turned it in. And so building their confidence levels is an important part of what I do. The other reason that students make unethical decisions, I call it procrastination panic. They waited too long to do the task, and now they're out of time. And rather than turn something in late, they would rather throw something together that might not even be their own work just so they have something to submit. And again, that's a fear, that's a panic response. But sometimes they think that it's better to cheat than to turn something in late and take some late points. Goes back to the grade. And of course, there are some students out there who will always just take the easy way. That's always been the case. That will continue to be the case. AI is just the new easy way. There has been, we used to say back in the days when I was in school, it was Cliff Notes. Teacher, don't use the Cliff Notes, don't turn to that, don't get that from the encyclopedia. There's always been an easy way. AI is just the new easy way. So what can we do to combat these problems at the source? Extreme solutions have become very popular. I see this on online message boards and teacher communities and in faculty meetings and PLC meetings. Just make them do it in class. All the writing needs to be done in class. Make them write everything on paper. We're going back to paper. Get the computers out of their hands. The courses that I teach, that's not possible. First of all, advanced placement exams are now on computers. So my students need practice writing on a computer in a timed situation. Also, computers are what students are going to be interacting with in the real world. It is not realistic, in my mind, to take the technology out of their hands. We fought for so many years to get the technology in their hands, to get these one-to-one classrooms, and now we're just going to take it away. So these are not solutions that work all the time. Here is what I suggest instead. Creating a classroom that focuses on process over product, that provides feedback instead of numerical grades, that does offer cheat-proof assignments that give students an access point where they won't feel tempted to check the internet. And establishing mutual trust between myself and the students that the material they're submitting is authentic. They can trust me with it, and I can trust that they did it. The first thing that I want to recommend is that teachers begin to see themselves more as a coach. So Jennifer Gunn said, to develop writers, especially in compacted timing, we must value the process over and above the end product. So our teaching energy needs to go toward coaching the thinking that writing demands and not trying to catch students in acts that shortcut the writing process. We want them to know how to do it. The polished final product becomes less important than the steps they took to create a product. So what does that look like? Teachers need to give students time in class at the beginning of a process. This is when students are going to have the most questions. This is when students are going to feel the least confident about approaching the work. And if you are not there as an in-person professor, then they are going to turn to, as I say in my classroom, Professor Google, and they are going to instead ask for help somewhere. So if you give them time in the classroom to do the planning, to do the drafting, and then later to do the revision, then they have access to their coach, they have access to their teacher, and they will turn to you before they turn to technological help. This process will also build their confidence in doing the work themselves. Yeah, you're there to look over it, you're there to make sure and see that they're doing it, but you're also there to give them the coaching they need that's going to build their confidence. So later when they are working independently, they'll say, oh, I remember what my teacher said, and I can do it that way. In this process, I use a lot of reassuring language to help my students know that they are not going to be graded for their efforts, meaning they're not going to be graded for quality the first time they turn something in. Students think that they are expected to be perfect every single time they submit something, but that's not process, that's product. I want to see their messy process so that I know what kind of skills we need to direct. And I have to say these things almost every day in my classroom. This is a new skill. You're not going to feel confident with it. Allow yourself to struggle with this. Accept that this is a struggle. It's supposed to be. Saying just the phrase, it's okay if it's not easy, it's not supposed to be easy, reassures them that they're not the only one in the room who doesn't know what's going on. I will tell them, this is your first attempt, you're gonna feel shaky about it, it's okay. You can still submit those shaky ideas to me. Let me see your messy process. I tell them, please trust me with your weaknesses so I can help you build them into strengths. If I can't see where your struggle is, then I won't know to address it. I use a lot of cheesy phrases, like this is our fledgling attempt at writing about poetry, or as we launch into our maiden voyage with Shakespeare. I'm sure that you have your own little phrases that you can coin and begin to use. They'll embed themselves into your students' heads and reassure them that struggle is process and it's okay. Continuing with process over product, one strong way to start the year and continue the year is with low stakes writing opportunities. These are opportunities for students to write where you are not grading them at all on the content of their writing, where you just want to allow them to express their ideas. Daily journaling. Journaling has been a key concept in an English classroom for many, many years, and there's often discussion of, well, how do you grade the journals? I don't ever even look at them. I just want to see that they're writing because they're thinking while they're writing. The thinking guides the writing, and I can see that they are thinking. They're thinking, and I tell them, if you don't know what to write, just start with, I'm very confused about this, and I'm not really sure because I don't know what this word means. And they're gonna think their way and write their way into understanding. Another opportunity here is reading responses, where you just have them respond to what they read. This encourages them to think through what they are thinking and their responses to it before you get into the academic nitty-gritty of how we're going to analytically write about something. It lets them respond emotionally. It lets them ask questions. Sometimes these can be submitted as just proof that the student read the story. So I want you to read a story of an hour over the weekend, and I want you to write a one-paragraph response. And that's just your own ideas about it. They can even say I. They can just write emotionally. They can say, this reminds me of, sometimes you give them sentence stems like that. But again, focusing on ideas and not over academic composition. Exit slips, of course, are always a common way to get kids out of class, and it just helps them to, again, ask questions in a safe space. Maybe they didn't feel confident raising their hand and saying, I don't understand this part, but they'll write it on a piece of paper and hand it to you, just like passing a little note. So if we start the year with these kinds of low-stakes writing activities, it builds their skills of communicating with you. It builds their confidence in communicating with you, that they can trust you with their ideas. But it also lets you learn the student's authentic writing voice, which becomes essential when they do start submitting academic writing, that you can look back and you can say, I'm not sure you wrote that because your sentence complexity wasn't quite there a week ago. Process pieces in class. This has been a key component of my dual enrollment classes. Even in a class that moves at a rapid pace, we have to take time, and if we value the process, then we are going to give our class time to that process. So my students, when we get started on a project, we dedicate class time to learning how to research, learning how to struggle through that. Giving them time to read in class. Even though this is a college level class, I want to see you doing the reading. I want to see you taking the notes and annotating. And again, I'm right there. I can coach them through it. I can help them know what to write. And outlining and evidence collecting. One of the reasons I like to do process pieces in class, even if we don't finish them in class, I know that they practice that skill. And so part of mutual trust is me saying, I don't know what's going to happen to that when it gets home. I don't know if they're going to turn to other means when they get home. But I know that they did some authentic work. I know that they started this authentically. I know that they produced these pieces from their own thoughts and their own skill levels in the beginning. What happened after that, it's okay. They got started. Feedback over grades. As I move into talking about this, I want to explain the gradeless philosophy that I use in my classroom. This is based on the book Pointless by Sarah Zerwin, and I'm sure that she's come out with a new edition since I wrote this. But the whole idea is that students receive feedback over receiving numerical grades. And this removes that number one problem of why students cheat, that fear of failure. They know that if they submit their piece on time, and it's as long as I wanted it to be, and they attempted the skill I was introducing, like incorporating quotes or citing quotes or talking about a new poetic skill, if they attempt that, then they're going to get a 100 because they tried. I will give them feedback then that helps that skill grow, and explain to them, how do we incorporate quotes a little more smoothly? What was the incorrect formatting on their citations? How do we need to talk differently about diction or imagery? And it gives them the courage to give me their ideas, whether they are, like I sometimes say, whether you're cooking awesome sauce or weak sauce, I need to try that sauce. The process work is important to getting that feedback as we grow and we learn and we try new ways to approach each different topic. And we will talk later about numerical grades being reserved for summative assignments. Students we do need to honor their time with giving them an assessment, an honest assessment eventually. But throughout the formative assignments, they receive a 100 for turning in authentic on-time work. So let's talk about managing feedback. Feedback can be overwhelming. If you have a lot of students and they are producing a lot of writing, I teach AP literature. My students are turning in an essay a week just about. So I need to find ways to make that not overwhelming for myself as an educator. And so I've spent the past couple of years coming up with some good ways to do that. Peer feedback can be, I know that it is not always the strongest feedback, but the more frequently you do it, the more trained your students become in being the givers of good feedback because they want to be the receivers of good feedback. There's a website called shortanswer.com that I will suggest that you go try out. It gamifies giving feedback in a way that my students enjoy. And of course, the good old pair share. This is essential to my classroom. My students sit at tables, and almost every time we are about to discuss something, I have them discuss it with each other first. This will help them voice their shaky ideas and strengthen them before they share them in the whole class setting. And that is immediate feedback right there for the way that they're discussing something and for the ideas that they had. Immediate and present feedback. The writing conferences I will talk about in more detail here in a minute. Sharing in class, something that I like to do when I take up those reading responses or when I take up an essay is to share the strong examples in the classroom, because it really makes the student whose work you're sharing, it makes them feel really good, but it also demonstrates to the other students what other students are succeeding with. Focused feedback helps me to get a quicker look through a paragraph or an essay. So I might say to them, these are the skills I want you to practice, but I'm only going to give you feedback on this one skill for this activity. So right now we're writing about poetry, and I want you to keep incorporating quotes. I want you to keep talking about imagery and tone, but right now we're really focusing on something like sound devices or something smaller. We are focusing on the way you organize the paper. So I'm really giving you targeted feedback for that specific skill. A lot of teachers talk about using a feedback bank where you can use a Google Doc or a Word doc and set it up so that you can, like, your most frequent feedbacks, and you can just copy and paste them so you don't feel like you're wearing out your fingers. That can be really helpful. Teams has, you can do rubrics, and they don't have to have points on them. You can put as many comments as you want on a rubric and just click through them. And then, of course, many lessons. If I see that all the students who submitted an assignment are struggling on one specific thing, I don't have to write it 27 times. I can just bring a mini lesson into class and have them find that error in their own work and then revise it and turn it back in. So feedback is essential. It can be overwhelming, but some strategies like these will help you approach it and not feel like you're overexhausting yourself professionally. All right, so writing conferences. I do writing conferences about twice a quarter, and we do them with the first big writing assignment because that's the one the students don't know me yet. They don't know what I'm gonna mark, they don't know what I'm looking for. I don't know their writing yet, so I wanna sit down with them and talk through a paragraph. You don't have to read the whole paper. I used to think that you did. When I first started doing writing conferences, 5 or 6 years ago, like intense writing conferences, I really thought that I had to sit there and read the entire paper along with the student, and it was time consuming. So instead, I ask the student to highlight their thesis statement, and I say, which paragraph do you want to look at with me while we're sitting here? And we can have targeted feedback based on what they want me to look at, and then I can look for a few key skills. I do require that my students take notes on the conference, that they write down the things that we talk about, that they're not just passive listeners. That way, and I'll explain more in a minute about how they are held accountable for the conversation that we are having. Conferences can be required. You can give a grade for whether or not a student set up a conference, and you can do some of those during class time. With the size classes that I have, I can't get them all done in a standard class period. So I have my students come in before school, stay after school. If you have like an activity period, or if they can come in during your planning period. Again, like with the process, you have to be willing to sacrifice some time for this if it is essential to your practice, which this is essential to mine. This is a great trick that I learned a couple of years ago that goes along with the you don't have to read the whole paper. Rough drafts can be incredibly overwhelming. And one of the most frustrating things to me as a grader or a feedback giver of writing is when you give so much feedback and the student doesn't take the feedback. So I started giving my assignment that students would turn in a 2-paragraph draft. Sometimes that's the introduction and 1 body paragraph. Sometimes they've already turned in their introduction, so it's 2 body paragraphs. And then I just focus my feedback on those 1 or 2 paragraphs. And when they get it back, their job then is to not only revise and fix what I told them in those 2, but to apply that same feedback to the rest of the paper, which is probably 2 or 3 more paragraphs. This is where they have to take note of the feedback and they're responsible for it. So that is, they're going to be graded on the same material that I gave them feedback on. Another way that I save time, and I do this both with the 2-paragraph draft and really anything I grade, I have a color coding system. There's a poster that hangs in my classroom that tells them what red and green and yellow and blue mean. And so they can just look up there and they can see, well, that one's red, so that must be a grammar problem. And I don't have to keep explaining every time. I just label them as I go, and then later they look back and they go, oh, I got a lot of green in that one. I must have used informal phrasing. And they start to internalize that as well. Finally, trusting the process. I already mentioned this just a little bit, but students are responsible for revising the way that we asked them to. Since growth as a writer is one of the key things we want to see in our students, they have to take responsibility for that process as well. I keep records of the conferences, they keep records of the conferences, and then when those final drafts come in, I can sit and say, well, we talked about strengthening her topic sentences. Did she do that? Or we talked about citing his quotations better. Did he do that? And I can give specific targeted responses and scores based on what we talked about they needed to improve. Another trick that you can do to make sure that students are responsible for their revisions is having them save their PDF. I grew weary of the tracking changes. That hurts my brain trying to read a paper where you track the changes. So this is what I came up with instead, that if you have them save it as a PDF with comments, then when you give them the draft back, then you can see what the paper used to look like and compare it. And another thing you can do is to have the students write a revision reflection. After they've submitted their final draft, have them write an explanation of what they fixed, how they approached revising it. It also gives them, like, they can write in, these are the goals, this is what we talked about in writing conference, and this is how I addressed those goals in my final paper. All right. So that's the way I get through the process, and that is the majority of what we do in my writing classroom, is working on the process. But the time comes for students to turn in the summative paper, and final drafts do still need to be graded. Students deserve that ultimate reflection of their efforts, and it's important that I give them the kind of feedback that is ingrained in them, you know, A, B, C, D, what's it gonna be? I do grade according to the same criteria. I don't like throwing surprises at them. If I told you this is what I was looking for, that's what I'm looking for, and I didn't look for this. But if they didn't follow my feedback instructions, if they didn't apply what we talked about, then that's where points come off. And that is the best way to hold them accountable for revising, is to say, this percentage of your grade is based on whether or not you revised it. I don't give a lot of feedback on final drafts. They're not going to go back and revise it. I'll ultimately give them a couple of sentences that lets them know, I see where you revised, this is much stronger than the draft, and like one ongoing, in future papers, try to incorporate these. Just 3 or 4 things. So on the summative paper, the percentage of your grade will be based on the amount that they revised, and that does mean placing content improvements over mechanical improvements. Students like to find the little things. They want you to tell them just where to put a period and a comma and where they misspelled something. They don't really want to do the bigger revision work. They want to be an editor. They want to be a proofreader. And really, those kind of mechanical improvements, that's what our mechanical essay writing is good at. Word can be your editor. That doesn't have to be me. Another note that I want to make is not having a numerical grade on the rough draft will help make them revise. This frustrated me for years. I would say, well, you got an A on the rough draft because it was a rough draft. I wasn't scoring it the same way I'm going to score the final paper. But it didn't sink in. So they would turn in the same paper and say, well, you gave me a 100 on it last week. Why did I get a C this time? Well, you didn't read the feedback. It wasn't an A paper. It was just check, you turned it in. So one way to prevent that is to just make it a check, you turned it in, and not an ample feedback and not a numerical grade or letter grade. All right, so ultimately, once we have worked through the process with these students and we've conferenced with these students, and they will eventually learn to trust us, and we also need to learn to trust them. This is the kind of classroom environment that is going to continue to produce authentic writing. It is going to help you feel like your job is not just to catch the cheaters, but instead to work with the students and help them make better choices. My goal is to trust that students are going to produce their authentic writing. I see them writing authentically in class. I see them working authentically in class. When I send them home to complete it, I have to let go control over what happens at home. I have to let go my worries of what happens at home, because ultimately those are the decisions that the student is making. But I set them up for success in my classroom, and I have to trust they're going to also go home with that same content and same idea for success. They trust us with their authentic ideas. We have to earn that trust. We have to earn that they feel confident in our classroom, sharing their weak writing, sharing their weak ideas. And that means setting down the red pen and instead having a conversation. It means instead of saying your final draft and only grading final drafts and looking for all the nitpicky things that they didn't get right, instead we say, let's look at the bigger idea here and let's help you work with your ideas and your communication. And when you use that kind of language with students, it really does shift. There's a real paradigm shift for the way that they approach writing in your classroom. And then when they do get better, they will be so happy to share their growth with you. When they finally get it, when it clicks and they start putting things together, organize their thoughts, when they start incorporating bigger vocabulary, they're going to be so excited to share it with you because you're the one who coached them to get there. Now, a few other considerations that I want to share with you today. I wish you all of the best successes in your classroom, putting process over product. But I want to give you a few other kind of takeaways for today that can be actionable in your classroom. First are some ideas I have for creating cheat-proof assignments. And I do want to address the target of this initiative, which is using AI in the classroom and acknowledging the uses of AI in the classroom. Also, what do we do when they do make bad decisions? What do we do when they cheat? And I want to shift my focus to the most reluctant students. I've spent a lot of time today talking about my AP students and dual enrollment students, but they are not the whole population of our student body. So I also want to address those Gen Ed on-level students. First of all, cheat-proof assignments. I have a couple of ideas here that I have honed over the years. Process pieces. Require students, first of all, I make them do all process pieces on paper because I feel like the process of writing something down is part of learning, like that tactile experience. But I don't want to take away their outline because they need their outline to go home and write their paper from. So I have them take pictures or take digital copies of those outlines or their notes so that then I have a digital copy. I'm saying to them, I'm going to give you a grade for that, so I need a digital copy. But then I also have access to that so that I can compare their final draft. And I can say, your paper didn't follow your outline. Where was that disconnect? Or did you maybe not write that yourself? Also, their sources. We all know that AI can hallucinate source material. So if you have them find their sources and download their PDFs with their notes on it, then you'll know what sources they actually intended to use versus what ends up on inside cited in that paper or on the works cited page. If you insist that your students provide individual connection, then it will be a lot harder for them to cheat on that material. It's a lot harder for generative AI to write a memoir about your own experiences or to write an editorial about your own opinion, or to add your own judgment based on a comparative contest. Memoirs make great college essays. My students write them frequently. The memoir assignment is the one that I get the least amount of AI submissions on because it's a personal assignment. The students are writing about something that's meaningful to them, but also it's something that they experienced. So they have good access points to that assignment. Editorials, have you ever met a teenager without an opinion? They have opinions. They have stuff they want to say about what's going on in our world, about what's going on in their schools. And so an editorial gives them a really good access point. And then you weave research into that. You weave in connections to novels and poetry, but they've got the access point of editorializing their own opinion. I've used the judging a contest assignment in a lot of different ways. My most common one in my dual class is the Canterbury Tales and trying to be a judge of who wins the storytelling contest. But I know a lot of English teachers also do a March Madness poetry bracket. A contest there is a perfect way to get their own opinion in there. They're writing about poetry, but they're doing it with a personal connection. And then I also want to point out, and I know we say don't use I in your papers. English teachers are notorious for that. But if we can back up off that a little bit and give them the opportunity to, and I usually reserve this for the conclusion. I say wait until the conclusion of your paper to put your I voice in there. But then that gives them, again, a more approachable point to come in and say their opinion without worrying about, is this the academic opinion? I can just insert myself and my own opinions into this. A great way to make your assignments sheet-proof is to make it very specific to your class materials. This can be done in a couple of different ways. I have colleagues who teach juniors who make sure that they are teaching really recent articles or really recent texts. They have found some amazing short stories and poetry by living writers who are publishing online. But these being lesser known texts, you're less likely to find materials that will help them to unethically write about them. It will also make it harder for them to find research or to find someone else's strong opinion, which means they're going to have to exert their own. I like to provide specific articles and say you need to incorporate Article A and Article B, and I want to see you make a synthesis of the two. Or I want you to use this article to talk about this novel that we've read. That makes sure that they're pulling quotes and materials from the specific things that we've read in class, which has the added benefit that students are going to be more confident with this material because you covered it in class and you talked about it in class, and they got to pair share and they got to hear that their ideas were good. Somebody reinforced that that was going to work for them. But at the end of the day, we have to acknowledge that AI has its place. Denying the functionality of artificial intelligence is not going to be a winning proposition in any classroom, because then the students are not going to trust us. The students are going to know that we are just anti-technology, and they are going to seek to prove us wrong, or they are going to assume that we don't know what we're talking about. But the majority of educators are using AI to help form our lesson plans, to help us organize our materials. We are using it in conversational ways and non-academic or workplace ways. So if we acknowledge our own use of this technology, then students are going to listen to us about it. We can speak from experience and say, these are the weaknesses and strengths of these programs. So first of all, I want to share this quote from Mintz, that while AI is useful for brainstorming and drafting, AI-generated text bypasses the deeper intellectual process that writing is meant to cultivate: critical thinking, interpretation, and original analysis. That's why we write. That's what we're doing in a writing curriculum. That's why students still need to produce authentic pieces of writing, even when AI-generated text can put it all together. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it can't do the thinking for them. But we can bring AI into our classroom and talk about different ways that it can be helpful. And I know we've got a full range of lessons that are going to be available to you for teaching different ways to bring AI into the classroom. So I just kind of want to put in my 2 cents in some ways that I've found it useful in my classroom. You have to be very clear about your expectations. Just like when I talk to my students and I tell them that in order to get a 100, it has to be turned in on time, they have to have this many words, they have to use this many quotes. The same is true with AI. Like, we can use the training wheels that are established and the boundaries that are established within Magic School to help us with brainstorming. Or today we're going to be using Magic School in class to help us with outlining. And then you need to be clear with, but that is all that this is going to be used for this assignment, because we are going to be learning this or practicing this skill independently. And tell them why. Let them know why. I found a lot of success in just explaining to my students, yes, sometimes outlining can be done by AI programming, but today we're practicing outlining as your own independent skill, because you also need to know how to organize your thoughts. Or I'll say, your ability to find quotes in a poem is something I'm wanting you to practice today, not for you to search it up online. We read a whole novel. It is hard to find quotes in a novel, but I need you to struggle with that today, rather than using this online resource. When you are allowing them to use AI, teach them how to use it safely and how to train the program. I had a fantastic conversation with a student who is wanting to use AI in certain ways, and we sat together and he showed me some of the prompts that he uses to try to make sure that when he is using AI to help him brainstorm, that it's not giving him more than he asks for. And so you can help them put in prompts that say things like, make light revisions to word choice, or correct grammar and punctuation, but do not change the content of the sentences. If you tell the bot what to do and what not to do, then it's going to be a much more helpful tool. And we have to teach them how to train the tool. And then, once you have allowed them to use it, Teach them how to ethically acknowledge their use. This is something English classrooms have been doing for years. How do you cite that? How do you give the author credit? That used to be the kind of plagiarism that we spent most of our time looking for, was where did you use a source and not give it proper credit? AI is really the same problem. And so MLA and APA organizations have been dealing with this for us, and they've come up with ways to help you acknowledge the use of AI in endnotes and works cited pages, parenthetically. And so I've started experimenting with this in my classroom and opening that up to my students when it's time for that polished final draft. You don't want to feed it your entire paper, but maybe your thesis statement seems weak. Ask it to help you revise and rewrite your thesis statement, and then give it credit in the sentence. Revised by AI, revised by Magic School. Knowing that they have to acknowledge it, first of all, is going to make them a little more hesitant, because they're going to say, well, I don't want it to get credit for my thoughts. Like, I want them to know those were my thoughts. But it will also acknowledge that this is a tool that they can use within limitations. They can also, this is an alternative way of acknowledging their use instead of doing it parenthetically or putting it all on a works cited, particularly maybe with a smaller assignment or something that's not a formal paper. Have them write a reflection. How was AI used in this assignment? And so they can include what prompts they used. They can talk about what they learned from it. They can also talk about what changes did they make and what changes did they not. What did they choose to incorporate? What did they choose to keep in their own words? And then did they decide that this was a productive use of AI, or was it not? And now, what to do when they do cheat, because some of them will cheat. There's always going to be one, right? The most important thing to me, and this is coming from my role as the chair of the Academic Integrity Committee, address it. Don't ignore it. I've spoken to so many teachers who are like, it's so rampant and it's such a big problem. I just want to move on. But you have to acknowledge it, because if you are ignoring it, it's not going to get better. If you ignore it, then they think they got away with it. But also, if you ignore it, you're missing an opportunity to build a relationship with that student and understand what led to the choices. The focus needs to be looking for that mutual trust. The focus of this conversation needs to be not berating a student, not anger, but it needs to be a conversation. I see that you made this decision. I always feel that you go into these conversations saying, I know that you made this choice. Don't say, did you? Because that gives them the opportunity to be untruthful again. But go in and saying, I see that you made this choice. What led you to make that decision? And if you talk it through it with them, then you're going to find out, was it procrastination panic? Was it fear of failure? Did they just not want to do it? Approaching a student in that conversational way, I have been very successful with them actually saying, yeah, I did because, and they'll start to kind of like acknowledge to themselves why they made that decision. Address it, don't ignore it. And then consequences. They do need to redo the assignment. Those skills were important. That practice was important. Now they're missing out on something all the other students practiced. So rather than, and your district, your county will have some kind of policy in regards to this. So do refer to your district policies, but allow them to redo it. And for a passing grade, because again, it's the process, not the product, that's important. Make them recreate the process. And depending on what they've done, that could be going back to square one. That could mean, well, you're gonna have to have new materials now, and you're going to have to write a new outline. Or it could just be, well, let's go back to where your process stopped, and then let's do this better. You can require that it's done in front of you. You can require that for a while. You've got to rebuild trust with this student. So it might be, we're going to have a couple of afternoons that we spend together working on this. But again, make it more about establishing trust and make it more about encouraging the skill that they failed to practice the first time. All right, so now to address the most reluctant students. These are students who may have come into your classroom and not seem like they want to learn. But I will remind you of my original philosophy that I brought to you at the beginning here, is that students do want to learn. They are there for a reason, and they want their time to be worthwhile. They don't want to sit in your classroom for an hour and do nothing. So you just need to rekindle that spark that lets them acknowledge that they do want to learn something and that they enjoy growing. They may have had trust issues with teachers from way back. They may have some academic trauma from failures in the past. So you might have a longer way to go to establish the mutual trust, because they need to trust that you're not there to fail them, that you're there to help them grow. And so a lot of that language needs to be used a lot more frequently, that effort is encouraged, and you can prove that with the grades and the marks that you're giving, with the feedback that you're giving, and the encouragement that you're giving. Homework classwork balance is important. Students who, especially at the high school level, are not signing up for challenging academic classes frequently have something else going on in the evenings that is going to make homework an impossibility for them, either because they literally don't have time or because they've never chosen to do homework and this isn't going to be the year that they choose that. So instead, you do have to provide more time during the school day. And just look, what are the skills that are important to me? What are the skills that I'm going to sacrifice time in my room for, because that's what I need to see students doing? And so they might need additional assistance. They need more of that coach. They need more of those coaching periods and more of that interaction. These students need writing conferences, and they need feedback just as much, if not more, than an advanced student does. Help them set goals that are relevant and reasonable. Maybe they just want to pass the class. So you let them know, what I need from you to pass this class is I need your authentic participation. I need to see your authentic writing. I need to see your efforts. Even if you're brewing weak sauce right now, I need to see that, and I need to see those ideas. They want to graduate high school. You know they do. Find out what their career goals are. Make the learning relevant to them, and then give them the opportunity to respond from that place. Give them an assignment that allows them to incorporate some of their interests, making them relevant and not necessarily like curriculum bound, because they need to practice the skills and not necessarily the old English texts that you were trying to present to them. Creative methods, creative genres, and choice. Allowing student choice gives them an approachable inroad. And that encouragement and setting some goals are going to help you reach even the most reluctant students through these methods. Ultimately, my goal today was to encourage you that authentic writing is still possible. It's still important, and it is still possible. Even in an AI world, we can continue to build writers in our classroom that are going to go out and be leaders in the world. So I'll end with this quote by Mintz. By making writing more purpose-driven and applicable to real-world contexts, instructors can help students see why developing their own authentic writing voice matters, even in an age of AI-generated text. Thank you for your time, and thank you, MTSU, for supporting us in this.
Thank you, Ms. Bennett, for being with us today. This was a great presentation. It almost makes me want to go back and be in your 11th grade English class to experience some of these activities you do with your students in AI. Thank you so much for that. This video today and other videos produced by the Center for Educational Media in the College of Education at MTSU can be viewed at a later date on demand. Selected videos can also be viewed in our program known as CEM Online. When you go to CEM Online, you can view the video and generate a certificate to be presented to your district for professional development credit. All of our videos can be accessed at the CEM website, which is cem.mtsu.edu. We invite you to view our videos online at our website, And when you go there, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you for being with us today, and Ms. Lois Bennett, thank you for a great presentation.